In the early 1970s, the Pacific Northwest was a place of mist, towering evergreens, and a growing sense of modern unease. People generally believed that evil had a specific face, a scarred, twisted visage that warned of danger from a distance. But the man who would come to embody the American nightmare didn't look like a monster from a storybook. He was handsome, articulate, and possessed a smile that seemed to radiate genuine warmth. This was Ted Bundy, a man who wore what psychologists call the mask of sanity so convincingly that it shielded a predatory void that no amount of human emotion could ever hope to fill. He was the ultimate paradox of the era, a charismatic psychology student who walked among the social elite by day while hunting the vulnerable in the dead of night. To truly understand the darkness festering within Bundy, one must look back to his formative years at the University of Washington and his relationship with a woman named Diane Edwards. She was everything he desired to be, wealthy, beautiful, and possessing a sophisticated grace that he felt he lacked in his own humble upbringing. Diane was his first true love, but more importantly, she became his first deep, consuming obsession. When she eventually broke his heart and ended the relationship, citing a lack of direction and maturity in his character, the rejection did more than just hurt. It forged a lethal blueprint in his mind. Diane's physical features, the long, dark hair parted down the middle and her slender frame, would become the specific template for the women he sought to destroy. In his twisted internal logic, every future victim was a surrogate for the woman who had deemed him unworthy of her love. Despite this internal turmoil, Bundy's external life remained a masterpiece of social engineering. He was a brilliant psychology student, often praised by his professors for his keen insights into the human mind and behavioral patterns. He didn't stop at academics. He immersed himself in the world of high-level politics, becoming a trusted volunteer for the Republican Party. He rubbed shoulders with governors and influential state leaders, appearing for all the world like a rising star with a limitless future in law or public service. This environment provided the perfect camouflage for his activities. No one suspects the clean-cut man drafting policy papers of being a cold-blooded predator who prowls the dark corners of college towns looking for his next target. His method of abduction was as calculated and manipulative as his social life. He understood that the quickest way to lower a young woman's natural guard was to project a sense of vulnerability or need. He would often appear in public spaces wearing a fake plaster cast on his arm or hobbling slowly on crutches, struggling to carry heavy books or load a sailboat onto his car. He exploited the innate empathy of young women, inviting them to help a gentleman in obvious distress. Once they reached his tan Volkswagen Beetle, the trap snapped shut with terrifying speed. The passenger seat of the car was often removed, allowing him to easily hide and restrain his victims as he drove away from the safety of the streetlights. By early 1974, a heavy shadow fell over the Seattle area as the first wave of violence began. It started with Linda Ann Healy, a popular radio weather reporter who vanished from her basement apartment without a trace, leaving only a blood-stained bed behind. Then came others in rapid succession. Co-eds from the University of Washington and nearby colleges began to disappear at an alarming rate, seemingly swallowed by the night. The police were utterly baffled. There were no witnesses, no signs of forced entry, and no physical leads to follow. Fear paralyzed the entire region as young women began to realize that a phantom was hunting them in the heart of their own safe communities. The peak of this initial wave occurred on a blistering July day at Lake Sammamish State Park. In broad daylight, in front of hundreds of oblivious sunbathers, a man identifying himself as Ted approached several women, asking for help with his boat. Most declined his request, but two did not. Janice Ott and Denise Naslund disappeared within 4 hours of each other, leaving behind their belongings and a shocked public. For the first time, witnesses were able to provide a consistent description. A handsome man, a tan beetle, and a name that would soon become synonymous with pure terror. As the sun set on that fateful summer day, the investigation took a frantic and desperate turn. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The authorities eventually released a composite sketch based on the various descriptions gathered from the park. To those who knew Bundy personally, the resemblance was uncanny, yet his polished reputation continued to shield him from suspicion. Sensing the net tightening around him in Washington, the predator realized his time in the Pacific Northwest was coming to an end. But instead of retreating into the shadows to hide, he decided to expand his hunting grounds. With a new law school acceptance in hand and his Volkswagen packed with the tools of his trade, Ted Bundy set his sights on Utah, ready to bring his nightmare to a whole new state. He crossed the border into Utah under the cover of a new academic pursuit, hoping the change of scenery would settle the mounting pressure within him. But Salt Lake City was not a sanctuary. It was merely a fresh forest for the wolf to roam. While his classmates at the University of Utah Law School debated the nuances of justice and ethics, Bundy was scouting the quiet suburban streets of the Midvale area. The killings resumed almost immediately, proving that his thirst for violence was no longer a choice but a physiological necessity. He was becoming more daring, no longer content with the shadows of the Pacific Northwest, pushing his boundaries into the mountain towns of Colorado. The escalation of his brutality was matched only by his growing arrogance. He truly believed he was smarter than the system he was studying. However, that illusion of invulnerability crumbled on a humid August night in 1975. Officer Bob Hayward, a patrolman performing a routine sweep, noticed a tan beetle driving with its headlights extinguished. When the officer attempted to pull him over, Bundy's instinct for flight took over, leading to a high-speed pursuit through residential streets that ended with his cornering. The search of the vehicle revealed a dark inventory: a crowbar, a ski mask, handcuffs, and strips of bedsheets. While the police didn't have enough to link him to the disappearances yet, the discovery of this murder kit was the first physical proof that the charming law student was a man of dark, violent secrets. Even behind bars, the predator was restless and manipulative, treating the legal system like a game of chess. During his transfer to Colorado to face murder charges, he exploited the court's leniency. Given permission to conduct legal research without handcuffs in the Aspen Courthouse library, he watched the street from the second-story window. When the guards stepped out for a moment, Bundy leaped. He spent a week in the wilderness of the Rockies, starving and cold before being recaptured. But the second escape was his masterpiece of deception. He spent weeks meticulously sawing through the steel reinforcement of his cell ceiling in the Glenwood Springs jail. Having starved himself until his hip bones protruded and his frame was skeletal, he shimmied through the narrow opening, dropped into the jailer's living quarters while the man was away, and simply walked out into the freezing night. He fled to Florida, a place where he was a nameless stranger, hoping to vanish into the coastal crowds. But the hunger was now a starving beast that could no longer be controlled by logic or caution. In the early hours of January 15, 1978, the mask of the sophisticated intellectual fell away completely, revealing the monster beneath. At the Chi Omega sorority house in Tallahassee, the violence was no longer surgical or hidden. It was a frenzied explosion of pure, unadulterated rage. He moved through the sleeping house like a shadow, leaving behind a trail of broken lives and a community shattered by an unprecedented level of fear. The Ted who had politely asked for help with a boat at the lake was gone, replaced by a creature of terrifying, mindless impulse. The final manhunt ended in Pensacola, triggered by a routine check on a stolen vehicle that Bundy had been driving across the state. The struggle was desperate, a raw battle of physical strength between a man with nothing left to lose and an officer determined to end the nightmare. As the handcuffs clicked into place for the last time, the legend of the charming killer was fraying at the edges. Bundy remained smugly confident in his ability to manipulate the upcoming trial and represent himself in court. However, he was unaware that in his final moments of madness at the sorority house, he had left a unique physical signature on a victim's skin. Deep in the forensics labs, experts were focusing on a gruesome bite mark that would soon become the focal point of the trial. The Florida murder trial of 1979 was unlike any legal proceeding the American public had ever witnessed. As the first to be broadcast nationally on television, it turned the grim reality of mass murder into a nightly media spectacle. Ted Bundy, ever the narcissist, saw this as his ultimate stage rather than a place of judgment. He fired his public defenders to represent himself, a move that allowed him to strut before the cameras in tailored suits, playing the role of a brilliant, wrongly accused intellectual. He cross-examined witnesses with a chilling, clinical detachment, even questioning those who had narrowly escaped his grasp. To the viewers at home, he was a fascinating enigma. To the law, he was a predator, attempting to outmaneuver justice with a silver tongue. While the prosecution detailed the carnage he had wrought, a bizarre phenomenon dubbed Bundy Mania took root in the spectator gallery. Scores of young women, many resembling the physical template of his victims, filled the courtroom daily. They sent him flowers, whispered his name, and giggled at his jokes. This unsettling devotion was a testament to his most dangerous gift, the ability to mask a predatory void with a veneer of charisma. These women didn't see a monster. They saw a handsome, articulate man who looked like someone they could trust, proving that the most effective disguise for evil is often the appearance of complete and total normalcy. However, the charm that had shielded him for years finally met its match in the cold world of forensic science. The prosecution presented what became known as the smoking gun, gruesome bite marks left on the body of a Chi Omega victim. Dr. Richard Souviron displayed enlarged, haunting photographs of the injuries and compared them to a dental mold of Bundy's own crooked, uneven teeth. The alignment was exact and undeniable. In that moment, the narrative of the charming law student was replaced by the reality of a savage attacker. This physical evidence was the definitive link that finally stripped away his polished facade, revealing the animalistic nature of his crimes. When the guilty verdict was read, Judge Edward Cowart delivered a sentencing that would become legendary in the annals of legal history. He described the murders as extremely wicked, shockingly evil, and vile. Yet, in a haunting exchange, Cowart addressed the killer directly, calling the situation a total waste of humanity. He noted that he would have loved to see such an articulate man practice law before him, highlighting the tragic irony of a man who possessed every tool for success but chose instead to use his gifts to destroy lives. It was a formal acknowledgement of a brilliant mind wasted on a legacy of blood and terror. For 9 years, Bundy occupied a cell on Florida's death row, continuing to manipulate the system from within. He became a master of the legal appeals process, using his knowledge to delay the inevitable. As his execution date loomed in 1989, he began a desperate final game, offering detailed confessions to cold cases across Washington, Utah, and Colorado. He doled out information about his victims like a currency, hoping to buy more time on Earth. He spoke to investigators with terrifying detachment, describing his urge to kill as an independent entity that lived within him, a dark force he could no longer control despite his intellectual prowess. The end finally arrived on January 24, 1989. Outside the Florida State Prison, the atmosphere was more like a festival than a somber execution. Hundreds gathered, cheering and lighting fireworks in anticipation of the news. When the report broke that Bundy had been executed via the electric chair, the crowd erupted in triumph. The man who had been the blueprint for the charismatic serial killer was gone, leaving a legacy that fundamentally changed criminology and public awareness. Ted Bundy's story remains a permanent warning that evil does not always lurk in the shadows. Often it wears a suit, a smile, and the mask of the boy next door.